The air over Germany in early 1944 had a different taste. For Mayor Klaus Richter of Jagdgeschwader 54, it was the bitter taste of exhaustion. His Messerschmitt Bf 109G, a sleek and deadly machine that had once felt like an extension of his own will, now felt heavy, sluggish, and tired, much like himself. For years, the skies had belonged to the Luftwaffe. The sound of their engines had been the sound of dominance, and the sight of their wings had meant the terror of the enemy. But something had changed. The bomber formations from the west, the flying fortresses and liberators, were flying deeper into the Reich than ever before. They were like an endless tide, and Richter's squadron, the Grünherz, or Green Hearts, was the crumbling seawall. Richter, a man whose face was etched with the lines of 120 aerial victories and a profound weariness, adjusted his oxygen mask. His wingman, a boy of 18 named Corporal Hans, flew tight to his left. Hans was a new pilot, his face still round with a youthful innocence that Klaus envied and pitied. "They are flying so high today, Major," Hans's voice crackled over the radio, the awe in it almost painful to hear. "Higher than the last one." "Just stay on my wing, Corporal," Klaus replied, his voice a low rumble. "Don't get target fixation. The big ones are not the threat. It's what flies with them that you must watch for." He had seen them, small, shiny specks that moved with a frightening speed. They had been appearing more and more frequently, thin little planes with a peculiar long nose and a bubble canopy. He had heard rumors from his fellow pilots, tales of a new American fighter. Some called it the Mustang. He had dismissed them as exaggerations. The Me-109 was the finest fighter in the world. Its performance was unmatched at high altitudes. No American plane could possibly keep up. Yet a knot of unease had been coiling in his stomach for weeks. He had seen their speed, the way they seemed to glide effortlessly far above his own aircraft, as if mocking the struggle of his straining engine. It was a new, unknown variable in a sky he had always known. The sky was his office, his sanctuary, his hunting ground. And for the first time in years, he felt like a stranger in it. The bombers appeared on the horizon, a massive silver cloud that glittered malevolently in the sun. It was a sight that had once filled him with the thrill of the hunt, but now only brought a weary resolve. The hunt for the bombers was no longer the primary mission. Survival was. As he prepared his squadron for the first pass, a single, clear voice from the American radio frequency, carried by the wind and the high altitude, bled through his headset. A casual, friendly tone that felt horribly out of place. He couldn't understand the words, but the casual confidence in that voice was a chilling sound. It was the sound of a new enemy, one that had not yet learned the meaning of fear in the skies over the Reich. It was the sound of a storm he felt powerless to stop. For Lieutenant Ben Carter, the sky over Europe was a canvas of constant, breathtaking motion. His P-51B Mustang, a marvel of engineering, felt like a living creature, an extension of his own thoughts. The Merlin engine hummed a powerful, constant song that promised speed and endurance, and the bubble canopy gave him a panoramic view of a world both beautiful and terrifying. He had named his plane the Spirit of Philadelphia for the streets and people he had left behind. Each time he climbed into the cockpit, he carried the hope and fear of a city on his shoulders. Ben was part of the 4th Fighter Group, and their mission on this cold February day was a deep penetration escort. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They were to fly with the bombers all the way to Berlin and back, a round trip of unheard-of length. "They say these things can make it all the way," his flight leader, Captain Murphy, had told him during the briefing. "With the drop tanks, we're going to give the boys up front all the protection they've ever dreamed of. The Jerrys won't know what hit them." Ben flew a steady line, scanning the blue expanse. He had heard the rumors on the ground, the German pilots' frustration, their growing confusion as the Mustangs appeared where they shouldn't. He had seen their faces, their small, desperate shapes in the cockpits of their outdated planes as they broke off engagements to save fuel. It wasn't a fair fight, not anymore. The P-51 was a long-range killer, a hunter designed to pursue and destroy. He felt a pang of something akin to pity, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, professional focus. This was not about honor or glory, but about getting the bombers through, about getting home. Below, on the ground, Major Richter's anxieties had become a reality. His squadron had engaged the American bombers, but the escort fighters had been relentless. The German planes were fast, but they lacked the Mustangs' endurance. They would make a pass, shoot, and then have to turn back, their fuel gauges dropping at a terrifying rate. He had seen them, the sleek American fighters, the ones they had dismissed as mere curiosities, flying with an unnerving confidence. They were faster, they climbed higher, and worst of all, they were not leaving. A few of his pilots had been shot down, their planes spiraling into the ground in plumes of black smoke. Hans had managed to score a hit on a bomber but had to break off, his fuel tank running on fumes. "Major," Hans's voice was trembling. "They are everywhere. I can't shake them. They don't give up." Richter watched as a Mustang peeled off from a bomber formation and pursued a lone FW-190. The chase was a cruel dance. The German plane was fast, but the P-51 was a predator, closing the distance with effortless speed. The American plane's guns fired, a short, sharp burst of fire, and the FW-190 erupted into a fireball, leaving nothing but a ghost of smoke in the sky. For the first time in his life, Klaus Richter felt a profound and terrible sense of dread. He was not just a hunter. He was now the prey. The air was no longer a place of predictable combat, but a trap. The war had changed, and he, the once unrivaled master of the skies, was now just a soldier, flying a plane that had lost its edge against an enemy that had just found its own. The morning of March 6th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the day's grim work. For Major Klaus Richter, the mission briefing felt like a eulogy for his squadron. Their target, a massive bomber raid on Berlin. The number of planes was staggering. "They are coming with 1,000 of them," his commanding officer had said, his voice a strained whisper. "And we have 1,000 men to fight them, or so they tell me. We are the last hope for the Reich." Klaus nodded, but he knew the truth. They had a fraction of 1,000 planes, and they were not flying against bombers, but against the specter of the P-51 Mustang. He and his pilots took off in a desperate climb, their engines roaring a strained, protesting song. The sky was an unforgiving expanse of blue, and the German planes were a few scattered specks, desperately trying to gain altitude to meet the enemy. Suddenly, the American bombers appeared, not as a cloud, but as a storm of metal. They were flying in tight, disciplined formations, a terrifying and beautiful sight. But what truly stole Klaus's breath was what he saw next. Flanking the bombers, above them and below them, were hundreds of P-51 Mustangs. Their silver fuselages glinted in the sunlight, a swarm of deadly hornets. They were there, far inland, where they should have run out of fuel hours ago. The rumors were true. The P-51 had the endurance of a bomber and the teeth of a fighter. The shock was a physical blow. The Luftwaffe had developed its tactics around the limited range of Allied fighters. They would wait for the Spitfires and P-47s to turn back, and then they would pounce on the unprotected bombers. That strategy, that final, desperate hope, had just been torn to shreds. "Major, they are still with them." Hans's voice was a horrified gasp. "The fighters, they are still with them." Klaus didn't respond. He simply pushed his throttle to the limit and screamed a single word into his radio. "Engage!" The battle that followed was a massacre. The German planes were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and outgunned. The P-51s, with their deadly armament of 6 machine guns, sliced through the German formations. Ben Carter, flying his P-51, felt a surge of exhilaration as he dove into the fray. He had been told the German pilots were the best in the world, and he saw their skill, the desperate maneuvers they made, the tight turns and frantic climbs. But his Mustang was a thing of grace and speed, and he was able to outturn them and outclimb them, to stay on their tails with an unnerving ease. He shot down a Focke-Wulf 190, the pilot bailing out 1,000 feet below him, a small white blossom of a parachute against the blue sky. He felt nothing but a cold sense of triumph. The roar of the engines was a symphony of violence, a high-pitched scream of metal and desperation. The sky had become a chaotic ballet of planes, a deadly dance of fire and steel. Major Klaus Richter, his squadron decimated around him, found himself locked in a duel he knew he could not win. His opponent was a P-51 Mustang, its silver fuselage reflecting the sun like a mirror. The plane was flown with an almost arrogant confidence, weaving and turning with a speed that left his own Me-109 feeling like a crippled bird. He pulled the stick back, climbing hard in a desperate attempt to gain an advantage. He had done this maneuver 1,000 times, had used it to get on the tail of countless enemy planes. But the Mustang simply climbed with him, its pilot, Ben Carter, pushing his own plane effortlessly into the heavens. Ben was in awe of his opponent's skill. The German pilot was a master, his every move deliberate, his tactics flawless. But Ben knew his plane was superior. He saw the struggle in the German's maneuvers, the desperate, straining effort. He saw the chance and took it. He pushed his stick forward, diving into a steep vertical drop. The Mustang's speed was legendary in a dive, and he felt the immense G-forces press him into his seat. The German pilot, in a last desperate act, tried to follow, but his plane could not handle the speed, its engine rattling in protest. Ben leveled out, pulling a tight turn, and found himself perfectly behind the Me-109. He closed the distance, his crosshairs steady on the German plane's tail. His thumb moved to the trigger, but he hesitated. He saw the small, insignificant details of the enemy aircraft, the green heart painted on the side, the lines of fire on the fuselage. He saw the pilot's head turn, a helmeted shape looking back at him. For a split second, their eyes met. Ben felt a connection, a terrible, profound understanding. This wasn't a monster. It was a man just like him, trying to get home. He let go of the trigger, but the momentum of the fight was a force he could not stop. The German plane, sensing his hesitation, pulled into a hard turn, but it was too late. Ben pulled the trigger, a short, sharp burst of fire. The bullets ripped through the Messerschmitt's engine, and the plane shuddered violently, a column of thick black smoke pouring from its nose. Klaus saw the flash of the American's guns, felt the terrible shudder of his plane, and knew in that instant that his war was over. His engine sputtered and died, and the plane, a faithful friend that had carried him for so long, began its final, lonely fall. He fumbled with the canopy release, pushed it open, and threw himself from the cockpit. The cold air hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment he felt a terrible, profound freedom. He was a bird without wings, falling from a sky that had betrayed him. He pulled the cord on his parachute, and it blossomed above him, a fragile white flower against the blue. The silence of the ground was a profound, deafening thing after the violent roar of the engines. Klaus Richter landed in a snow-covered field. The wind knocked out of him. He lay there for a moment, looking up at the sky, his sky, which was now filled with the silver shapes of the enemy. The bombers, their mission accomplished, were turning back for home, their escort of P-51s still with them, a protective shield that no longer seemed to have an equal. A part of him was glad for the silence. The war was no longer his to fight. The fear, the weariness, and the constant strain were gone. He pulled himself to his feet and began to walk. He was a prisoner now, a lost man in a country he no longer recognized. He was a ghost in the machine of a war that had left him behind. He had believed in the invincibility of the Luftwaffe, in the superiority of their planes, in the triumph of their will. He had been a hero, a symbol of German might. But the P-51 had shown him the truth. It wasn't about courage or will. It was about technology, endurance, and the grim, unwavering resolve of an enemy that had the resources to fight a war on a scale he could no longer comprehend. The sound of the Mustang's engine had been the sound of their defeat. Back in the cockpit of his P-51, Ben Carter was shaken. The German pilot had been a worthy adversary. Ben had seen the green heart on the side of his plane, and for some reason the sight had resonated with him. He wondered if the pilot had a family, a home, a city he was fighting for. He had a brief, terrible moment of clarity where he realized that he wasn't a hero, just a cog in a machine of destruction. He was the sword, and the Luftwaffe, with all its history and glory, had been the shield that had just broken. He landed on the airstrip back in England, the plane's tires squealing as they touched down. He climbed out of the cockpit, his legs feeling weak, and saw the faces of his fellow pilots, their eyes wide with a mixture of exhilaration and disbelief. They had done it. They had flown to Berlin and back. They had proven that the P-51 was the new king of the sky. But for Ben, there was no victory celebration. The face of the German pilot was seared into his memory. He had looked at him, a man, and for a moment, they were not enemies, but two souls caught in the same brutal, tragic storm. The war would go on, and the P-51s would continue to fly, an endless stream of silver planes that would chase the Luftwaffe from the skies. But for Ben, it was a hollow triumph. He had not just defeated an enemy plane, he had defeated a man, and in that act, he had lost a small piece of his own humanity. The sky was now theirs, but the cost was higher than he had ever imagined.